We are going to talk now about elections. How fair are Canadian elections? Well, not fair enough, according to the government, which is why this week they tabled their long-delayed Fair Elections Act. It's a big document, almost 250 pages long. Some of the highlights? Well, the bill would end the process of vouching for someone without proper identification. It would move the Commissioner of Elections Canada into the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and it would limit the Chief Electoral Officer's role to share information with the public. And those are just some of the highlights. When he introduced the bill, Pierre, who's the minister in charge of democratic reform, took some, well, not so subtle shots at the man in charge of Elections Canada. After all, the Conservatives and Elections Canada have tussled over the years over issues like the robocall scandal and the in-and-out controversy.
The Fair Elections Act will give the Commissioner of Canada Elections, the investigator, a free hand by making him absolutely independent. Independent from the elected government, independent from Elections Canada. The referee should not be wearing a team jersey. Independence is governance 101. It is normal to separate administration from investigations. That's what the Fair Elections Act will do.
That is Pierre, the Minister of State for Democratic Reform. He was on the House last week talking about this. Now, the former head of Elections Canada, Jean-Pierre Kingsley, told me on Power and Politics that he gives the bill a high grade.
Overall, it looks like a good bill.
It's about a B+ for you. All right. Jean-Pierre Kingsley.
How does A-
A- even,
yes.
Okay. But opposition leaders like Tom Mulcair and Justin Trudeau gave the bill, well, a very different score.
This is mostly about making life easier for the Conservatives, who are serial cheaters in federal general elections.
It's disconcerting that a government that has such a long-standing feud, a Conservative Party that has such a long-standing feud against Elections Canada, would move to remove the investigative arm from Elections Canada.
So will the bill make elections more fair, or will they undermine Elections Canada? Joining me with his view is the head of Elections Canada, Marc Mayrand. Good morning, Mr. Mayrand, and welcome back to the House.
Good morning.
Mr. Poilievre has told me that he consulted with you. He had a meeting with you. You exchanged ideas for an hour, and he gave you an open invitation to call him. In your view, were you properly consulted before this bill was introduced?
Oh, we certainly had a meeting last summer, and I think the minister listened attentively to suggestions I was making. I think at this point, this is no longer a concern. I think we need to focus on the next steps here, and I hope that Canadians will be consulted in the bill, and that the parliamentarians will take the time necessary to review it in detail.
You are being diplomatic. I only say that because, as I understand, usually a consultation is when a minister goes to someone like the Chief Electoral Officer and gives them a draft copy of the bill, and you get a chance to read the bill before it's made public. Did you get that opportunity?
No.
Would you have wanted that opportunity?
Absolutely. And in the past, even Elections Canada was even involved in helping with the drafting of legislation. That's not been the case here. It's not the first time. But again, the important point here is that we now have a bill.
What's your overall impression?
It's a bill that, first of all, it's over-encompassing. It's a very broad-based bill, touch all aspects of the electoral system. I think there's quite a few things that are quite positive in it, and there's a few things that will need quite close review.
Obviously, what has been the debate all week have been comments Mr. Poilievre made that one of the reasons they had this bill was to make sure that the referee is not playing for one of the teams. Did you take that comment as a criticism of your impartiality? In other words, as a way to undermine the work you'd done?
It seems to suggest that Elections Canada is seen as wearing some sort of team jersey. I'm not sure which one exactly was referred to, but as I indicated, I think if I wear a jersey, it's the referee jersey.
That was interesting because there's been a lot of reporting, as you know, about tension between Elections Canada and the Conservative Party in particular over various issues like the in-and-out scandal, robocalls issue. Did that signify to you the fact that you weren't consulted on the draft, then the comment that you're not a referee, you're playing for one of the teams, signify that the relationship between Elections Canada and the government is very strained?
Well, I think it's, again, the important point here is that at last we have a bill, and hopefully we'll have the time to consider it fully in the upcoming weeks. Again, those decisions that were done on those files were done based on facts that were available, and the commissioner at the time decided to file charges, and the DPP at the time agreed that those charges should proceed.
The Director of Public Prosecutions.
Yes.
You and I have spoken on this program in the past about getting Elections Canada the necessary tools to conduct investigations. One of those tools was the power to compel testimony. That's what you would have liked. There is no power to compel in the proposed legislation. What do you make of that?
It's interesting. It's a bit disappointing. Again, there's a lot of good provisions in the bill, increases in offenses, new offenses being created. But I'm afraid there's nothing in the bill that improves the toolbox for the commissioner, again, who carries those investigations. I think issues about timeliness of investigation are not addressed there. The ability of the commissioner to have access to relevant information or people who have information about a case is not there. So again, I feel that it's still a very incomplete toolbox that's provided to the commissioner.
What else would you have liked to have seen in the toolbox that's not there?
Basically, there were two things. For the commissioner, he should have received the power to compel witnesses, again, under authorization from the courts, of course. The other power that should have been included there is the authority to request parties and EDAs, writing association, to provide a financial documentation in support of their financial return. Unfortunately, this is not in the bill.
I want to unpack both of those. Let's first talk about the power to compel. The Commissioner of Canada Elections, Yves Côté, last year said his inability to legally compel witnesses was hampering the investigation of more than the 1,400 complaints about the false or misleading telephone calls to electors in the 2011 election. And now you've only got Michael Sona, the one Conservative campaign staffer who's been charged. Would the ability to legally compel have sped up this investigation?
Likely, because many people in that investigation refused to talk to the commissioner, even if there were no suspect. And I'm afraid to say that this is happening more and more in files investigated by the commissioner. He's constantly confronted with this obstacle.
In the past, someone could vouch for someone when they appear if they didn't have identification. Now you need a form of identification. Some believe that this is good because in a world where you need identification, this would prevent voter fraud. Some believe this would disenfranchise certain people, homeless people, or certain groups across Canada who have difficulty providing ID. Where are you on the voucher?
I think we need to start from the point of view that every Canadian has a right to vote. That's a universal franchise. Vouching is meant to assist people who face challenges in proving their ID at the poll. And there are very strict procedures around vouching. It's not a loose thing. There's very strict procedures. We estimate that in the last election, a little bit more, over 100,000 electors who required vouching before they could cast a ballot. What will happen to those electors in the next election? Not clear to me. We tend to forget that we live in a very diverse country, that people live in very different circumstances across the country, and there's still a number of Canadians for whom it's quite a significant barrier. It's almost an impossibility for them to get the proper ID documents that would meet the requirements of the Act.
When Pierre Poilievre came out and he said one of the reasons we took the commissioner out from under your watch was that the commissioner didn't control his or her own budget and that it wasn't as an independent office. What's your response to that?
I think it's not a correct reflection of what actually happens. And I hope parliamentarians will call the current commissioner, previous commissioner also, to discuss about the issues they're facing in their investigation and what's really needed for them to be more effective.
All right, let's talk about one of the other proposals you want, which is the better documentation. How would that make a difference?
Would certainly make it easier to follow money in the system. Right now, how we get is an overall report stating expenditures of parties during campaign. We don't have much detail about these in those returns. And more importantly, you don't have the supporting document that attests to those expenditures, for example. So it makes it very difficult to carry a complete compliance review of those returns.
Following the money, obviously critical. Thomas Mulcair has pointed out that there's loopholes, as he's described them in here, for certain kind of donors. What's your reaction to that?
I haven't heard. I'm not familiar with the comment from Mr. Mulcair and in what context it was done. The Act provides for increased contribution, a small amount. I think it goes from $1,200 to $1,500.
Yeah, that's right.
It does provide also for increased spending limits, 5%. So that means that's probably going to be around $22 million in the next election. There's another provision, and again, we're still carrying our analysis on the bill, but there is a provision in the bill that will allow party to exclude from campaign expenditure any communication with electors as long as it's done with an elector that has contributed before in the previous year and that there's a call for additional money there. So that would affect what we call in the business the get out the vote, which is becoming increasingly a significant expenditure for campaign. We estimate, again, that's based on what we can figure out from the returns we received, that maybe 20-25% of the total expenditure goes to get out the vote process. If I understand the provision correctly, that means that over and above the 5% we mentioned earlier, a party could spend about 20% more as long as it's linked to fundraising. So I think that begs question about the fair level playing field in the system.